Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is reviewing the 2021 Australian Contact Centre Benchmarking Report with Auscontact's research partner, COPC Incorporated. Today's webinar is titled The CX Advantage, Customer Insights in 2021. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, very familiar, Alex Boland, we hope that we're going to be sparking your interest. You're going to ask heaps of questions and we engage you in the conversation, as well as provide you with ideas to take back to your respective businesses. Don't forget, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping. Remember, to get the best out of the session, it's important to interact. So don't take too many notes because we'll be providing you with a copy of the recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Alex or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're having that Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them. If you're having any issues with your technology, especially the internet, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid, or you can actually revert to the registration confirmation email, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes will be available there for you. Now, I'm absolutely certain that you all know how to ask a question in Zoom these days, but let's try the Q&A button on the control panel just in case. And of course, I want to ask a trick question. And that trick question is, on Monday, what changed in New South Wales? There may be some varying versions of it. Was it the queue at Kmart? Tracy knows the answer, well done. Was it supposed to be not called something? Oh yeah, Kim's got, Michael. Apparently we all got haircuts. He's been looking at you, Alex, clearly. Yeah, it was called Freedom.
Absolutely.
And I've never seen so many people queued at a barbershop as I saw at 7 a.m. on Monday in our local shopping centre. So with that, I'm thrilled to hand over to Alex Boland, Director, ANZ Operations at COPC Inc., to take us through the research findings. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Fiona. It was very exciting this week to have the first haircut for me in 3 months or so. Queensland, you don't feel our pain, but Melbourne, you'll get there as well. Okay, let me talk to you about where the data comes from so you can kind of frame your understanding of some of the stats. Because in this webinar, we actually have two sources of data. Firstly, we asked a little bit over 140 contact centres for loads of information around their operation, around what metrics they measure, around how they recruit and hire and train, around their plans for the future, around what platforms they use. And whilst all the detailed findings are in the report that you can get from the website, we kind of got high-level findings in 3 topics. So the first one is the one we chatted about last month, work at home and the future of contact centres. Some really super interesting things in that. And if you're interested in that one, the recording's available free of charge online. The one today, we're going to focus on customer experience and really focus on how do we measure customer experience? What are the metrics and like practically how does that play out? But also, how well do we understand the customer experience? So from an industry point of view, and then comparing that to a consumer perspective to see where we have this alignment and also where we have a disconnect. And now the last webinar is in a couple of weeks' time, employee experience and well-being. And that's where we delve deeper into that kind of voice of the employee piece. A bit of a shout out though to all the organizations. This is not all of them, but it's all of them that completed the survey and provided their logos to be put in the report, to be willing to be visible here. So particularly thank you to you and the people that weren't able to do the logo thing as well. It's just like, clearly it's not practical to get this data unless you give it to us. So very much thank you. You all should have gotten your link now to the free report for you. If you didn't participate, there's a fee for it. If you have participated, it's all free of charge. I plug that just because we have other reports coming out in the future and we'd love you to participate in them and receive a copy as well. In terms of the centres that responded, they were from all across Australia. So Australia being Australia, half of them were Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne. But you can see with the exception of Northern Territory, it's broadly Australia. So we have regional Western Australia, regional Tasmania, we have Hobart, we have Adelaide, we have Queensland regional centres. So it's all across Australia. In terms of the types of centres, 81%, if you're looking on the right there, 81% had a single site, 11% had 2 sites, and 8% had 3 or more sites across Australia. So that's kind of the contact center leader side of the data. The second set of data I alluded to earlier is that we surveyed around 1,000 Australians about their most recent experiences with organisations, how many steps there were to get an issue resolved, was it resolved, were they happy with it, what channels did they use, what is their preference, all of that. And we're going to match up this data with some of the industry data. So for the consumer data, it was just adults, so it was between, well, not between actually, it was 18 to above 60, but we were able to break it down into those groups on the left, so 18 to 29, 33 to 44, 45 to 60, and then above 60. Industries, we asked them, who have you most recently interacted with, and asked for those experiences. So 82% listed those industries as the most recent interactions. So telcos, banks, utilities, insurance, government, airlines, logistics, and consumer electronics. So they accounted for 80% of the industries. And the questions we were really asking them were around channels, preferences in channels, how's that changed over time, around whether they actually enjoyed those experiences, whether they were satisfied, whether they were promoters of the organizations, and then around service journeys as well as they move between channels. Let me get started on the findings of this particular webinar. So we'll talk a little bit around survey design, around multi-channels and how preferences are changing, as well as really just how do we measure customer experience. The format of the slides is that for many of the slides, I'll do a comparison. And on the left-hand side, I'll be fairly consistent to put kind of the industry view. So that's from the 140 contact centers. And on the right-hand side, where appropriate, I have the consumer perspective. So firstly, we asked about consumers and essentially, would they be willing to pay more to receive world-class service? So what proportion of consumers? From an industry point of view, 35% of people said less than 1 in 5, like 1 to 20. 15% said 21 to 40. 11% at the very top end said 80% or more would be willing to pay more. Then based on the 1,000-ish consumers we surveyed, 63% said they would be willing to pay more if they knew they would receive world-class service as a result. Now, obviously, some of those terms are open to interpretation, like what is world-class service, for instance. But just comparing that, 63% of consumers saying they're willing to pay more. From an organization perspective, from the industry voice on the left-hand side, only 31% said it was 60% or higher. So I think, or at least the data points to here, is that perhaps we don't appreciate how much world-class service is valued by consumers, or how many consumers value that and are actually willing to pay more for it. Secondly, we asked around channels. So we asked, again, on the industry perspective, so those contact center leaders on the left-hand side, thinking about customers, rank the channels from 1 to 7, so based on popularity. 1 being phone, 2 SST, so self-service technology, like a chatbot or an IVR self-service, email, web chat, and then going across the bottom, in-person messaging and video. So that was the order from the industry perspective. We asked essentially the same question. If you knew your issue would be resolved regardless of the channel, what channel would you choose to engage with? Phone and email being 1 and 2, and it's a little bit misleading to actually say it's 1 and 2. They were a fraction of a fraction difference between phone and email. Really, phone and email are essentially both tied at 1. Web chat 3, self-service at 4, and then 5, 6, and 7 the same. So overall, I think you would say, well, as I said in the comment, there's a general alignment here. The difference, the most significant difference, is from an industry point of view, self-service was considered the second most popular channel. From a consumer point of view, that's the 4th most popular channel. So we, again, generally speaking, this data would say that we think self-service is more popular than what it actually is. We think it's better than what it is from a consumer point of view. Perhaps we're listening to vendors a little bit too much around how wonderful self-service technology is. But I'll almost contradict myself on that point with the next slide, because we also asked which channels are increasing in popularity or decreasing in popularity. So for video and messaging and web chat, you can see the channels there in the middle. From an organization point of view, do you think more consumers like this channel or less consumers like it? So for messaging, web chat, and self-service, the organization perspective was that they're all increasing, they're becoming more popular. For video, phone, and email, they're about the same, they haven't changed. And then for in-person, face-to-face, they have decreased in popularity, which perhaps it's the way we think about popularity, but typically for something to become more popular, something has to become less popular. From the industry point of view, essentially, everything is either the same or increasing in popularity. But from the consumer point of view, it's far more balanced, a half increase and half decreasing roughly. And the ones that are increasing are self-service. So self-service, from a customer point of view, self-service is not as popular as the industry thinks it is, but it is increasing in popularity. So it is becoming more popular. Face-to-face messaging and video also increasing, but the more traditional channels of phone and email decreasing, and also web chat decreasing. So phone and email by far still the most popular channels, but they are decreasing. When you ask people who've changed their preferences for what their chosen channel is, those people are moving away from phone and email and moving towards these other ones like the in-person, self-service, messaging, and video. So they were the ones where we expect to see a lot of growth in the future. But that's just around the channels and the preferences and how it has changed over time. We also asked, when you survey your consumers, like how do you actually get feedback from your customers? So this is more about customer understanding. And this slide is just about the industry. Now it's no longer a comparison from consumers to industry. So SMS or email with a link to the website. So 36%. So that's more than 1 in 3 centers say we link them to a website to complete a survey. 26%, so slightly more than 1 in 4, do a post-call IVR. So more than half of centers are doing either a post-call IVR or an SMS to a website. Survey popping up, web chat, etc. 14%. 9% though, so still like a reasonable amount. That's 10% of centers. So 9%, like 10% of centers, obviously it's 9% of centers. It's 1 in 10 almost. Outbound calls made by staff members. We're paying people to make phone calls to get feedback. So that's 9%. We asked them during the call 7%, which I think, like, come on. If you're speaking to someone, you deliver the service and then you say, are you happy with my experience? I think you might find there is a bias in the result where people may not be entirely comfortable saying, no, it was terrible. I hated the experience. But 7% say they do it during the call. 5% do an SMS conversation. As a Vodafone customer, I think I get SMSs from them. Like if I respond, they send 2 or 3 SMSs. And then outbound calls with an automated system. And as a Telstra customer as well, I think I've had that in the past. But they're less common. But that's just the channel of collecting the feedback with the survey. What about the survey itself? For example, how long is the survey? How many questions? So we asked, how many questions in your survey? 38% only has 1, 2, or 3. So more than 1 in 3 only have 1, 2, or 3 questions. Another 38% were 4, 6, or 7 questions. So 2/3, more than 2/3, have 7 or less questions in their survey. 19% were 8 to 10, and 5% were greater than 10. So you can see like less than 7 is kind of what is common. In the agreement that we have with Auscontact, where we're working in partnership and doing these reports, we're going to repeat this survey for several years in a row. So we'll be able to see some trends on that. I suspect, though, if we had done this survey 10 years ago, these numbers will be much bigger. As we have started to understand consumers and what matters to them, we've realized that some of the questions we ask are just noise. And I think you will find, on average, surveys are shorter now than the Jetstar 96 question survey I once got when I was traveling in Southeast Asia. But the length of the surveys do vary by industry. So perhaps I should clarify that. The outliers at least vary. So this is trying to highlight the least questions, the most questions, and the average questions by industry. So banking, utility, insurance, government, super. So the minimum outside of government, it's 2 or 3. Government, there was one government contact center that does a single question. The average, that blue diamond, is really 4, 5, or 6. So the average is 4, 5, or 6. But the maximum, huge variation. So 9, 10 for the kind of the smaller maximums. But insurance, one of the insurance organizations that provided data has 18 questions, which is a reasonable amount. Perhaps there's a branch in logic, so not everyone gets all the questions, but 18 seems like a lot to me. But government with 50 questions, that seems quite intense, particularly if they are requiring you actually type in and respond to some of them. I suspect, based on doing lots of survey design and working with organizations to do CX, the organization with 50 questions in the survey either has a very low completion rate, or they have responses that are just a bit of noise, like people just selecting like AAAA or whatever the equivalent is just to get through the surveys. You will create a lot of survey fatigue with consumers if you try to get them to do a 50-question survey at the end of our interaction. But thinking about that comment at the end of the interaction, well, not all surveys are at the end of the interaction. So we also asked, what sort of surveys do you actually do? And based on the responses, I thought it was worthwhile pausing from the findings and sharing with you the 3 most common surveys organizations do. Like, when are the surveys actually being done? What is the audience? So firstly, we asked about interaction surveys. And an interaction survey is a survey about an interaction, about a touch point. So you make a phone call or an email to an organization, you get a response, and they send you a SMS with a link to a website. And it's about that phone call or that email that you sent. So based on your most recent interaction with COPC, how happy were you with the experience? It's specifically about that interaction. The second survey we questioned about was a service journey survey. The service journey is a newer idea in our industry. It's only been around for a couple of years. But a service journey is the journey a customer takes across multiple channels to get their issue resolved. So for instance, for a bank, a service journey, a big, complicated, painful service journey is a home loan, applying for home loan, which I recently did with a major bank in Australia, and I counted my interactions and the time period. I think I had 15 interactions over about 2.5 weeks to get my application finally approved. I had to do phone calls, I did SMSs, I sent emails, I printed out documents and signed them and sent them back. So service journey is asking about the experience of the entire journey. So you wait until the home loan, in this case, is either approved or rejected, and then you send the survey and say, what was your experience like applying for a home loan with our bank? The interesting thing about interaction versus service journey surveys is that the correlation to customer behavior, like recommending, buying from you again, etc., is far stronger based on their service journey satisfaction than the interaction satisfaction. And that kind of makes sense in the point of view that each interaction in my home loan, like making the phone call, email, SMS, print things out and send it through, whatever, none of the steps were actually terrible. They asked me to do something that was easy, they were friendly, they sent me the things and I did it. So if I had been asked about satisfaction for each step in that journey, I would have said that step was fine, but the overall journey was a terrible journey. The final survey, and this is often not controlled by the contact center, maybe it's controlled more by marketing, is a relationship survey. That's where you survey your customers if they have a relationship with you, but regardless of whether they've contacted you. Sometimes there's a bit of a bias if we're only surveying the people who call us, because they're the people who perhaps have the problems and we can get a much worse result. We don't have a better understanding of what like the real interactions are. So the relationship is surveying people who you know are your customers, even if they haven't made a phone call or an email. You might do this less frequently, once a quarter, once a year, to get a pulse check on your customer base as a whole, not just those people who've contacted you. So with that educational slide out of the way, we asked, do you do an interaction, a service journey, a relationship survey? And the results are here on the left-hand side. So 64% do an interaction survey. 32% said they did some type of service journey survey. I think perhaps this is higher than what it actually might be, because the word in here said completing a claim, an application, etc. And I think some organisations may be thinking more about interaction, but we'll try to adjust the wording to see if we can get a clearer perspective on that next year. But 1 in 3 said service journey. 28% said their organisation also does a relationship survey. But 9%, again, 1 out of 10 centres basically, doesn't collect feedback, which seems shocking to me in the sense that it's not just about kind of patting ourselves on the back and saying customers love us. We should be surveying customers as a way of driving improvement in our operation. So even if you are a complaints team or debt collection team, like dealing with customers who don't really want to deal with you, I'd massively encourage you to get feedback from them. They will identify process issues, policy issues, opportunities to drive efficiency. We really should be listening to our customers. That was the types of surveys. What about when do we survey? Which is an interesting question. So 3% said we ask during the interaction. 23% immediately after the interaction. 11% 1 to 3 days, 6% 3 to 7, etc. You can read the numbers yourself. But 51% said it's more than 2 weeks. 23% said it was straight after. So kind of adding those together, 3/4 of the surveys being sent are either straight away or a couple of weeks after. And from a CMPC perspective, like we work with global organizations all around the world, we have lots of research into what's considered best practice. We don't actually have a best practice for this. It depends on your organization. If you are a telco and you're troubleshooting a problem like a fault, it might make sense to survey a couple of days after or a week after, because you want to make sure the fault doesn't reoccur. If you are like a package delivery organization and someone's calling about a lost package, maybe you don't want to survey them the second they finish the phone call. You want to wait and make sure the package actually is delivered, and then you survey them about their experience. So there's reasons why you might delay, but there's also reasons why you might do it straight away in terms of getting a higher response rate, a higher completion rate, and getting the emotions of that interaction then. So that was about what do we survey, like what sort of survey and when do we survey? What about the metrics themselves? What are we even asking? So I asked the question in the survey, are we doing CSAT, MPS, customer effort, or other metrics here? And then we split it out by human-assisted versus self-service technology. The human-assisted, what we mean by that is where there's a human, sounds silly, a human assisting, as in a phone call or an email or web chat, where you're dealing with a person. Self-service technology, again, self-service, so like self-service in the IVR or a chatbot or maybe in a mobile app. What you see is overall, CSAT is the most common question. So CSAT, being that question, based on your most recent experience, overall, how happy were you? Typically, you get to say you were very unhappy all the way through to very happy with a neutral midpoint, like I was neither happy or unhappy, commonly on a 5-point scale. So 65% said they did it for the human assisted, far less for self-service. Net promoter score, that whole how likely are you to recommend us to your friends and family on a scale from 0 to 10, so on an 11-point scale. They had it at 45% for human assisted, but self-service at 31. So looking just at self-service, actually, you're more likely to get a net promoter score question than you are to get a CSAT question on self-service. Customer effort, which is a newer question, I suppose, a new way of thinking around measuring customer loyalty and engagement and predicting future behavior. So do you agree we made it easy for you to get your issue resolved today? 14% did it for human assisted and only 1% for self-service. And then repeat customer rate and customer lifetime value was significantly less. You see it was higher for self-service, but overall far less common. So CSAT, and there is a cast on that side, CSAT and MPS are by far the most common metrics. But I had a hypothesis around MPS that it's predominantly used by larger organizations rather than smaller. So I wanted to split it out by center size, and we can debate what large and small is. I just use less than 25 FTE, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, and above 100. And then you have the proportion using CSAT and MPS. Firstly, if you look at CSAT in kind of the lighter bluish color, there's no relationship between the size of the center. Small centers use it, 76%, 82% of larger centers use it. It just is relatively kind of not linked to the size of the center. MPS, though, does seem to have a link. Smaller centers, only 38% were using. Larger centers, it was above 60%. So the data seems to suggest that MPS is far more common with larger organizations than it is with smaller organizations. Let's kind of change gears a little bit and think again about the consumer perspective and compared to the organization perspective. So we asked organizations, again on the left-hand side here is organizations. Thinking about your customers, aside from getting the issue resolved, what is most important? And they could rank these. So quick and easy process, correct and consistent information, etc. So it wasn't a ranking, they could select these. So the majority selected quick and easy. From a consumer point of view, same question, same options to choose. Firstly, again, there's a relatively similar alignment, like quick and easy, correct and consistent, to be heard and understood. Like that follows the same pattern there, but fair and honest treatment, massively higher from a consumer point of view than an organization point of view, like 3 times higher. From a consumer point of view, at least their stated beliefs, and sometimes there's a difference between what people say they want and what they actually want when you do research into it. But their stated belief is that fair and honest treatment is the #1 thing. Beyond getting the issue resolved, I want fair and honest treatment. That's the most important thing for me beyond issue resolution. Whereas from an organizational, from an industry point of view, that was the 4th most common thing or 4th most popular thing selected. Polite and friendly treatment was also higher on a consumer side, 13%, than it was on the organization side. That's about getting an issue resolved and what you want, though. We also asked, why do people not get issues resolved? As in, why do people avoid taking action on getting an issue resolved? Again, organization on the left, consumer on the right. So inconvenient, bad experience, thought issue was unresolvable. They're the top 3. And there's actually an alignment here in terms of the ranking, but there's something that stands out to me. So inconvenient was the biggest thing. Bad experience, second biggest. Thought issue was unresolvable, third biggest. Alignment across those in terms of ranking. But didn't know how to contact the organization. From a organization point of view, we think that's essentially a ridiculous notion. Everyone should know how to get in contact with us. That wouldn't be why people don't take action on issues, we're easy to contact, I guess is the thinking there. From a customer point of view, so we asked them, have you avoided taking action on an issue, and then why? 11% that have avoided said, I didn't know how to get in contact with them. So maybe it's burying phone numbers on a website. Maybe it's kind of forcing the consumer to go through a tremendous amount of self-service or something else before they can contact you. But a huge proportion compared to the industry perspective say that I didn't take action because I didn't even know how to get started. I didn't know how to get in contact with the organization. So maybe there is a bias creeping in because in our organizations, we know the numbers off the top of our heads and we know the email addresses. But for consumers, I didn't know how to get in contact was significantly bigger than the industry perspective. I thought it would be interesting as well here to break down the responses by age of consumers. So we asked, have you avoided taking action? And the left-hand chart there is the people who haven't avoided taking action. And then the remaining bars are the people who have avoided taking action and why. There's 4 colors that are repeated here. That's the age ranges. So the dark blue is the youngest age range, 18 to 29, then 33 to 44, 45 to 60, and above 60. So I think it's interesting that 58% of people above the age of 60 haven't avoided taking action. And as you go down the age ranges, they're far more likely to have avoided taking action. So avoided taking action, only 23% of 18 to 29s say that they haven't avoided taking action. Only 23%. So that's like 77%, like 3/4 of people 18 to 29 said that they've just avoided doing anything about it. Whereas 58% for the older age group, the above 60s, said they haven't avoided taking action. And you can kind of see the breakdown here. Inconvenient, no time, thought issue was unresolvable, bad, etc. But there seems to be a link between proactively getting your issue sorted out and the demographic, at least from an age point of view, that you fall into. And while this is interesting, it may actually be quite relevant for your organizations, because some of you may have consumers from a broad age range and evenly distributed, but I suspect some of you have an aging customer base or quite a young customer base, and the age seems to be linked to how likely they are to just proactively get something resolved or like avoid getting an issue resolved. And we asked organizations again on the left here, what proportion of customers had to use multiple channels to get their issue resolved? So like phone, email, and social. We try to be really clear on this. Multiple channels to resolve a single issue. So 29% said it was less than 1 in 5. 28% said it was like 2 to 3 kind of in 5. But only 21% at that top range. So I've tried to highlight that in the gray on the top left. So the 16 and 5%. 21% felt it was above 60% of consumers. So 1 in 5 on the industry said more than 60% of customers will need to use multiple channels. Drilling into that from the consumer point of view. So we said, have you had a recent interaction? If they said yes, we said, did you have to use multiple channels like phone, email, and social media to resolve this single customer service issue? 63%, which is close enough, so I'll just say 2/3, 2 in every 3 customers, when we asked them about the most recent interaction, so it could have been across any industry, just the most recent time you had a customer service issue, did you have to use multiple channels to get it resolved? Phone, email, social media, 2/3 said yes. That is much higher than the general view from the industry. I think we sometimes think the customer's experience or their journey starts when they dial our number and stops when they hang up. This would say many customers are doing things before that and after that to get their issue resolved. And not just like a second phone call, but having to change channels. The reason why this matters is regardless of whether this is consumer data again, regardless of whether they got their issue resolved or not, if we just look at the aggregate, did you use multiple channels? How happy were you? So this is based on CSAT, percentage of people who were satisfied or very satisfied. If they used multiple channels, 73% of them were satisfied. If they didn't have to use multiple channels, 84% were satisfied or very satisfied. So there's a roughly a 10% drop in satisfaction if they have to use multiple channels. But you might be thinking, well, maybe they use multiple channels like kind of because they wanted to, because it was more convenient or was faster for them or something. So we asked that as well. We asked, the data is intertwined here so you can see it hopefully more clearly. But we asked, why do you think consumers or customers use multiple channels to resolve a single issue? So that was the industry question. For a customer question, why did the process take you across multiple channels? So just for the people that said they use multiple channels, why did you use multiple channels? And we gave 4 options, but we can kind of bucket them together. The 2 on the left are they were forced to do it. The 2 on the right are they chose. So on the left, they were forced to because of the complexity. They were forced to because of the process. On the right-hand side, they chose to because it's more convenient, or they chose to because it will make it faster. And I think this is a super insightful slide. So from a corporate or from an industry perspective, so these are contact center leaders, 59%, so almost at 2 in 3 again, 59% say when customers use multiple channels, it's because they want to. They change channels because they thought it was best for them. It was their choice. From a consumer point of view, only 34% say that they changed channels because they wanted to. So that's 66%, 2/3 of customers, when they use multiple channels, that they're directly asking consumers here, there's not a bias creeping in here, 2/3 of them say, I use multiple channels because they made me do it, because their complexity or because the process forced me. And like I did a Facebook test maybe 3 years ago where I surveyed, I messaged maybe like a dozen banks in Australia, and I just asked, based on borrowing this much money, what interest rate would you give me for a home? Like I provided some of the details. I think 90% of them said, please contact our call center on this number to get your issue resolved. Like they weren't able to support me for that inquiry. And it was essentially just asking, what are your interest rates on your home loan products, which I felt was a fairly easy thing to answer. So they essentially, nobody was willing to have that conversation on Facebook chat. Now, why does this matter? Why does it matter if you force people or they choose? Well, you might anticipate the answer. People don't like being forced. And the data here, as it flicks across, is satisfaction. It's actually satisfaction and dissatisfaction here. And the gap is between when you force people to change channels or when they choose to change channels. So everyone used multiple channels. Top box. Top box is a common term just to mean the percentage of people who score the top, which is like 5 out of 5, or the percentage of people who say they're very satisfied. When they chose to use multiple channels, 50% said they were very satisfied with the experience. So not as high perhaps as if they didn't use multiple channels, but significantly higher than those who were forced to use multiple channels at just 24%. Top 2 box, so percentage of people satisfied or very satisfied, 88% satisfaction when they chose to use multiple channels compared to 65% when they were forced to. And then bottom box, actually 0% for when they were chose. So nobody said they were very dissatisfied when they chose to use multiple channels. 13% said they were very dissatisfied when they were forced to use multiple channels. And we sometimes view bottom box, that 1 out of 5, as we can refer to it sometimes as churn, as in it's linked to customers leaving the organization. If you force customers, if you don't help customers where they are at, they are far more likely to be less satisfied, far more likely to be dissatisfied. So I would challenge you, as I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week, just because you can offer a channel doesn't necessarily mean you should offer channels. Helping customers resolving their issue, making it easy for them is massive. So let me run through a few of the kind of conclusion-y thoughts that I have. Then Fiona, I would love to get your perspective with your background on a couple of these, and then we'll go into Q&A. So if you haven't submitted questions, I would love to see them. I'm just glancing, there are questions already. Thank you for those. If you ask more questions, we'll try to get through them. So for me, a couple of the takeaways are that organizations currently overestimate how popular self-service is. However, it is increasing in popularity. It's just not as popular as what we would like to think it is. CSAT is more popular than Net Promoter Score overall. For self-service, NPS is more common, but almost 1 in 10 organizations actually don't measure customer experience at all. In terms of survey design, well, there's lots of variation. Some have very short, some have very wide. I think, as I said in that comment, I think it indicates potential issue with how you've designed your survey if you need to have 15, 30, 40, 50 questions in your survey, or question, if that makes sense. And finally, a significant proportion of customers are forced to use multiple channels, more than what most people in the industry suspect. And when we force people to use multiple channels, they are significantly less satisfied or significantly more dissatisfied. Thank you for that. Fiona, would you like to share your thoughts? And I'll go to the Q&A slide, so follow these instructions, submit your questions. Fiona, please jump in. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you for sharing the perceptions or the realities between organisations and consumers. I think the lesson as an industry is we need to really listen closely to what our customers are saying, because they're ultimately what's most important. So, as is my wont, I thought I would give some perspective on what used to happen in the dark ages. So I'm going to go back to 2013, maybe not the dark ages, but it's a little wee while ago. And I'm going to move between survey types, etc. So in 2013, I'm going to talk about channels first. Contact centres said that customers used 3.1 channels to complete their interactions. And they were projecting, and you'll love this, Alex, that by 2018, they would need an average of 9.1 channels available to customers. I wonder how many of those contact centres were actually talking to their customers about the channels and just kind of going in on a pathway that didn't actually correlate to what customers were saying they wanted. Now I'm going to talk about the sorts of measures that were being used in 2014, so we're getting a little bit more recent. The measures that we used were CSAT at 82%, NPS at 35%, and I was really surprised about this, customer effort, 13%, so about the same as it is today. And the ways that customers were being surveyed in 2014 was online surveys at 38%, callback surveys at 33%, random samples by agents at 13%. I just love that. And call forward surveys by IVRs were also at 13%. So I kind of wonder almost what we've learned. In 2014, again in 2014, 11% of organisations were not assessing customer experience. But the good news is that this was a significant movement forward against 2013, where 24% of contact centres were not surveying their customers. So hats off. But I guess the question that I have for you, Alex, is if we said it was only 11% that weren't surveying in 2014, this is a trick question. How come it's only moved by 2% to 9% in 2021? Why?
Yeah, that's kind of shocking, a bit of an indictment on our industry if we've gone from 11% not measuring and now 9% not measuring. I wonder, of those 11 or of those 9 now, what proportion have like we love customers as part of their motto or their statement? I think there's a little bit of disingenuousness. If you say you care about customers and that's your priority, but you don't even get their feedback and use it to improve, I would challenge whether that's actually accurate.
Yeah. So look, guys, while we're going through Q&A, we do have some fantastic questions coming in. just be aware that we're running a poll, so that if you didn't participate in the report or provide your contact information, you can request a copy of the report. Alternatively, you can go to the Auscontact website, www.auscontact.com.au, click on activities, then click on reports, and then you will find the opportunity to purchase the report. So with that, let's go to our questions. And Kat asked a question for you, Alex, of course. Is there data on completion rates for how many questions were asked in customer feedback surveys? She said, I would imagine the more questions, the lower the completion rate.
So there absolutely is data, but not broadly across the industry to benchmark. As a general rule, yes, the more questions, the lower the completion rate. But the other caveats to consider is like what you really want to consider is the effort. There's a link between effort and completion rate. One of the drivers of effort is lots of questions. But I could get a really low completion rate with 4 questions if they're all like open questions, like they're not just select an option, they're like write a paragraph for every question. So a well-designed survey with more questions might get a higher completion rate than a poorly designed survey with just a few questions. So generally, yes, there's a link between effort and completion rate. Yeah.
Thank you. Question from Julia. She would like to know which survey type is the best in terms of participation rate. Yeah,
that's an interesting question. And we have seen various different data around that. If you do it, so one of the drivers of completion is emotion. If someone had a terrible experience or a great experience, so they feel something, they're far more likely to provide feedback, either positively or negatively. There is a link between an event and your emotions. You feel happy or sad right after something happening. So generally speaking, you will get a higher completion rate based on doing it faster. But the other caveat I would add in is that proactive methods get a higher completion rate than passive methods. And really what I mean by that is if I send you an email and you get the email, even if it's 5 minutes after and it's one of 20 emails you get, it's just easy to ignore emails or SMSs. It's less easy to ignore a phone call unless I don't answer it. Like someone actually calling you and talking through, or in a retail context, somebody walking up to you say, hey, could I just get feedback as you're leaving the store? How was your shopping experience today? So generally speaking, straight after an interaction, higher completion rate, and methods that are maybe more in your face, more proactive, higher completion rate than a passive thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. A question from Andrew. And Andrew would like to know whether we captured any differences between competitive markets, for example, retailers versus monopolies, for example, government, in terms of anticipated and actual results to surveys or preferred channels.
In terms of anticipated and actual results to surveys or preferred channels. So I imagine when we're talking about anticipated and actual, we might be comparing it to the perceptions and whether we're aligned. So I guess, Andrew, what you mean around that is saying essentially, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but maybe the government is more disconnected from what people really want, but organisations that are for profit care more and will understand more. I think that's a really interesting question. We have the data. I haven't looked at that, so I don't know. But I like the thinking. I think in a competitive landscape, you kind of do adapt or die. You have a lot more competitors. Or to say that another way, the ATO is not going out of business anytime soon.
I don't think so. I think you're probably on the money there. Todd has congratulated you, Alex, on today's event being one of the most insightful he's been to this year. So thanks for the kind words, Todd. He also has a question. So, you know, this he gives and then he asks.
Todd is my boss from 15 years ago also. My boss's boss, I think, back then.
So Alex, he would like to know, did you get any insight into satisfaction levels for companies who provided a lower number of channels to their customers?
Again, we didn't analyze the data to look at that. We would need to look at the data to see if that research question can be answered, but that is not something we looked into. The general thinking, though, is that it's better to have less channels that you manage well than more channels that you manage poorly. And just because you can offer a channel doesn't mean you should offer a channel. So I think potentially there will be a link. Again, sorry though, we don't have the data for that, or not in front of me at the moment. Good question, though, Todd.
Yep, as you would expect. Christine has a question. She said it's similar to the first one, but there's a little bit of a twist on it. Similar to the very first question asked, do you have any statistics that correlate the response rate based on the timing of the survey? For example, if you send it straight after versus, I don't know, 2 weeks after, is there likely to be a different response rate?
Well, I have seen data in the past that says, yes, straight after you are more likely to get a higher response rate. In this report, we didn't ask about completion rates, so it's not available in this data set at all. But yes, I have seen things available that say straight after is high response rate. I would add the caveat that, again, it depends on your organization. So the ISP, the telco, with a fault, and you don't actually know if it's going to be resolved for 2 days, it doesn't really make sense to do it straight after. And whilst a few of these questions have been about completion rate, if you use the math to understand sampling and random samples and how samples represent your population, the first time you do that, you might be shocked with how small a sample represents your population. If you could have 100,000 calls, for instance, and you randomly get responses back from 500 or 800, so less than 1% of your customers, actually, if that's representative, like it's completely random, you can get really good data, and it does represent your population very accurately. So it's a good question, as a question before, but you'll be stunned at how small a sample is representative. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about the size of your sample. I would be overly concerned about your randomness of your sample, whether it represents a population or whether you just ask people on the phone, did you like speaking to me today? Maybe you can't trust that so much.
Thanks.
So
Andrew,
rambling answer.
No. Andrew's got another question.
Sure.
Asking whether you conducted any research in the survey around gives to get, or would you consider researching this in the future? He said, surveys are often one way with little benefit for the respondent. How do you drive up responses or motivate people to respond?
Yeah, so that ties into a couple of points. So again, you don't need that many responses to be representative if it's randomly. So to start off with that point. Secondly, from a B2B, so some of you are B2C, dealing with consumers, and some dealing with organizations. So CFPC, management consulting, we deal with organizations. From a B2B, in like the research, for instance, this research, we absolutely give to get. So we give you a copy of this like several $100 report if you complete it. So we think that's a really good way of showing that we value your input and we value your time. In terms of the consumer space, it's really common that you like complete the survey and you could go in the drawer to rent an iPad. But that's a common thing to see. You do find that you're more likely to get responses that are just noise. So everyone just like picking option A or 1 or whatever it might be. So you get a little bit of noise. So I think I would encourage you to be less concerned again about the size of your sample, more concerned about the representativeness of your sample. Because again, small samples can still be very accurate if they are random and there's no bias that creeps in.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alex. And we see so many surveys out there, saying, here's a giveaway, and you just, as you say, people that complete may just be completing to get the goodies as opposed to really having value to add into the survey outcomes. Michael has a question. Michael's question is that the results demonstrate a gap with consumer expectation, which we've already talked to. Did you get any insights into how consumer expectation is being researched and understood?
Yeah. So let me answer that in twofold. This data, this consumer, is something that we did. We did that by using a panel that represents a broad group of Australians from like across Australia and different ages, and asking them about the most recent experience. And that's one of the best ways to get representative data, because if your sample doesn't represent the population, you can't trust the results. So that's in regards to our data here. If your question is more about organizations and how they understand customers, unfortunately, sometimes there's too much reliant on an interaction survey. So that survey at the end of the phone call or an email to get the data, and you're potentially excluding customers that didn't actually contact you in that last quarter, or customers that maybe have a slightly different product and they interact with you differently. So to expand on that, I worked with a telco in Christchurch in New Zealand, and they would survey people at the conclusion of setting up internet in the house, which makes sense. It's the end of a journey. But if the customer cancelled the order because it took too long, if the business said, oh, you're actually not in coverage or something and we can't install it, they just didn't survey any of those customers. So you just need to make sure that your sample represents your population. The best way to do this is with that relationship survey, that third one I talked about. And that's something we do for a couple of organizations. Every year we survey just their consumers, again, not just the people who contact them, but customers in general. We ask them about like major life events that might affect how they interact with the brand, for instance. So do a random sample of your customers. Don't just survey the people who contact you. If you want to understand about expectation, preferences, changes, things like that, channel strategy stuff.
Okay, we're almost running out of time, but there's a couple of good questions there. So Dave would like to know, did you capture any information on customers' willingness to move channels? For example, text a link to a customer waiting on the phone to get them to complete their interaction via digital.
So the simple answer is no, we didn't. The slightly more complex answer is that willingness or channel preference, it's not as though like me, Alex Boland, I will always choose to use phone or chat. What often drives is not just the consumer, but the nature of the interaction. If it's something like, to be extreme, my house is on fire, I'm not going to send an email to the fire department. So the nature of the interaction drives it. One of the worst experiences I've had during COVID, and this is purely anecdotal now, just my experience, was calling my telco, being told I needed to chat with an SMS, getting the SMS chatting, being told they couldn't resolve it and I had to go into the store. Going into the store and the store saying you're too busy and we'll put you into the queue. Like, so go to the food court and wait, and then we'll message you and then you come back. That was a horrible experience. A little bit unrelated to your question. The simple answer is no, we didn't collect data on that, Dave.
It's almost like the forcing you down a path, isn't it, really?
There was no choice at all.
Yeah. I think Dave's offering options. You can jump to this channel if you'd like. So the lucky last question, as I'd like to get also some closing remarks from you, Alex, and you've got your crystal ball going. I can see it. So based on this customer experience data, what significant changes do you forecast for the future of contact centres?
I think this relates to moving, as I alluded to when I discussed the home loan situation, moving from managing interactions, like managing phone calls and emails, to managing the journey as customers move. As in many organizations, there'll be a head of the contact center, a head of retail, a head of technology, which might include the self-service. And then even within those teams, there'll be like the inbound call team and then the social media team. We have structured our organizations to manage vertical channels. Really, we structure our organizations to manage channels. Most customers, 2 in 3, go across channels to get the issues resolved. So what I hope and what I'm seeing, and partly what I'm seeing is because we're working with organizations to do it, we are seeing organizations changing their structure to be managing the journeys across channels. So the new customer journey, the make a claim journey, rather than focusing on managing the inbound calls or emails. So moving from managing vertically to managing horizontally, if you can kind of conceptually say that. And I think that will be a tremendous benefit to consumers. And I think it's kind of just adds so much more value to organizations. So that's what I think we will see over the next 5 to 10 years, moving from vertical to horizontals in how we manage experiences.
Well,
Thanks,
I think that's a great note to end today on. Dare I say that we have the final benchmarking webinar on the 27th of October. I can't believe.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about employee experience and wellbeing. And we have a couple of other surveys coming out, which I think will be of interest, but we're not going to give the baby away with the bathwater yet. And the last thing I would pitch for you is go and get yourselves a ticket to the conference in February, because you have the opportunity to hear Alex talking about the latest consumer survey. But more importantly, Alex is going to get down and get dirty with you in a couple of roundtables, workshop sessions, so 10 to 12 lucky people in each session. You can probe Alex's brain. He'll walk out with no brain power left. You can get close and really get the answers that you want at the conference. So go to our website and have a look at the event. We look forward to seeing you on the 27th of October. Stay safe. Enjoy your freedoms, those that have them, and stay well. We look forward to the 27th. Thanks, Alex, so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.